Hi, today we're going to see how to create an app from scratch using preact. Preact is a web framework based on React. It tries to maintain the same API. We have almost everything we want, and it's just a 3 kilobyte length. So it tries to maintain compatibility, and it only lacks of prop types, but you can add them if you want, and add some really nice methods that you can add to your app. Today we're going to create a really simple demo. It's an app that it's based on a new API that allows you to if you put a text that you write in English, it's going to retrieve you back some emojis that try to represent the what you wrote, right? So for example, if you write hi there, it's gonna get you a hand waving or something like that. So it's pretty cool. It gets a score from 0 to 1 on how accurate it can be and the emoji itself. We're going to use Webpack. Webpack is a module bundler. The idea is that it bundles all your files so you can have a really nice file structure, and it translates that in your build files that you can add to your app. So it's not just for JavaScript, it's also for styles and assets, but we are using for our JavaScript. We're going to start from scratch. We create a new folder. The only thing that I'm not gonna do, but you should do it, it's um, install the Webpack DevTools, but you can do this. So we are going to install from npm Webpack and Webpack Dev Server. I already have it. Once you have this installed, we're going to start with the app. The first thing I'm going to do is to create a package.json file to store our dependencies. If you do npm init minus y, it's gonna create the npm package.json file with all the defaults options. So we have a test script that does nothing, and a main property pointing to an index.js. So the first part, it's the most boring part. You can skip it, but it's the most important for me at least. It's to do the Webpack configuration. So for that, we're gonna create the webpack.config.js, which is our standard way to tell the Webpack configurations. It's just a Node.js module, so it's JavaScript, and we're going to export an object. This is the Webpack configuration. We're going to use Babel. Babel is a compiler, so a transpiler. So we're going to be able to write code in ECMAScript 2015 or 16 or whatever, and it's gonna transpile for us in something that almost any browser can use. So the first config property is the entry. The entry is exactly the path where we're going to get our entry point. So we're going to create a source folder. The source folder will get all our code, right? And the first file is the source/index. That's gonna be our entry point. Now it's empty. And we're going to say to Webpack that will be our root file. Path is a Node.js module, and it's gonna help you to point to the directory. So dir name is where we are standing. It's our root, the root of our project now. And then we're going to the source folder and use the index.js file. It's the same as dir name plus /source/index.js, right? But it's prettier. So after the entry point, we're going to add the output. So the output is an object. It has a property called path, which is the folder where we're going to store our files. Again, we're going to do path.join, dir name, and then public, right? We're going to create this public folder to store our public files. So it will be easy to point the static assets there. So we created an empty folder. And the file name will be just app.js. So that's my convention, but you can do whatever. Like a lot of people use bundle.js or whatever. I'm going to show a couple of more properties that are particular to this project, but I think they are really useful for every project. So the property module allows us to create loaders. Loaders are functions that are going to run on every file that we determine and transform our code. So for example, we're going to use the Babel one. The Babel loader will allow Babel webpack to go to every file, JS file, and transform from ECMAScript 2015-16 to ECMAScript 5. So we're going to test it. So test it's run a rule expression. Or we're going to say, okay, just run on JS files. And please, we are going to exclude the node modules, right? Because we assume that our node modules are going to be already transpiled. Like that's already the convention. If you're going to expose code to other people, it should be standardized. So the next one will be the resolve property. Resolve will allow us to alias some packages. So I'm going to use root. So the idea is that we are able to pass an array there, and on every element of the array, which will be a string, we are going to pass a directory path, and then we are able to use absolute requires, like when you use node modules, but from that directory. So if I have, for example, a file inside ser/components header, I will be able to do instead of dot/ser/components header, I'll be able to do just components/header. So that's pretty handy, and we don't need to make sure that we're in the right file with the right require. And it's really nice for a lot of projects. And the other one, it's dev server. We're using this thing called dev server from Webpack that allows you to run a really easy small web server with whole module reloading and nice features. So the thing is that because it's a single page application, we're using the history API fallback that says like, okay, if you don't find a route, let's redirect to index.html. Index.html is going to be our only HTML file. We're going to store it in the public folder, so it's going to be statically accessible. It's a really simple HTML file. We're going to add just a title. Emo is the title of the app, a simple styling. So this is the style I'll use every time I start something from scratch. We're going to have a root div ID to mount our app, but we're going to give it a zero matching. It's gonna fill all the height. And every time I need to add a new typography, I came to this site and copy the font family because, of course, I don't remember it. So we're going to use Helvetica. Of course, I always use this box size in border box property, so it's much easier to calculate sizes. And the only thing we need to do inside the body is just create this div with an ID called root. You can call it whatever you want, but I call it root because we're going to mount our preact app there. And then we are going to call our app.js file, which is the one that we configured in Webpack to be our bundle. So it's like every time you build something, it's going to be the app.js, and then that's going to be our entry point. So that's all. That's all the configuration. It seems really easy. Only thing we need to configure is Babel loader. The Babel configuration. So the transpile configuration. This is just a JSON file stored in .babelrc. So Babel has something called presets. The presets are the transformation that we want to run. In our case, we just EX 2015. It's the only thing we need. And then it has plugins. We're going to use the plugin called Transform React JSX. And we're gonna use an option called pragma, which is the name of the function that it's gonna use. So we're going to use JSX, which is this kind of HTML syntax for expressing UI in React and in preact. And in fact, for example, JSX or React, the name of the function in our case will be H, which is hyperscript. It's a detail, you don't need to know this, but then we're going to see why is this important. Last thing we need to do for configuration is just install of course, the development dependencies. So you can use npm install -d, which is development. So we're going to start webpack. We'll start with the webpack dependencies. Then the babel loader, it's a node package. With babel core, it's the transpiler itself, right? So it's not shipped with the loader. And then we need the Babel preset ES 2015 for Babel and the Transform React JSX plugin for Babel, right? So it seems to be weird that it's easy, the dependency for Babel, it's Babel preset ES 2015, Babel plugin, Transform React JSX. So it made a little more sense now. So then it's gonna start all the packages. Also, in our package.json, we're going to remove our start to our test script, and we're going to create a start one. And I'm going to copy because I don't remember it, but it's really handy. So the idea is that it's webpack test server. We're going to inline the code, use how to load and reload. Our port will be 4444 because I want that. It can be whatever you want. And it's going to have serve the public content from the public folder, right? So it knows where to go to get our index HTML and our bundle code. So that's all. So then I need to change to the project. The only thing I need to do is run npm start. So it's gonna build everything. Okay, it seems to be working. Let's go to localhost 4444. It says the route is not there. Let's see what's happening. Okay, I think that port is already taken. Let's take a look. Let's try with 3344. Okay, it worked. Also, if we look at the source code, so the HTML is kind of empty, and we have the app.js with it's already generated by Webpack. So our index.js file it's empty, but Webpack and Babel asks you a lot of stuff for after the transpiling and the configuration, right? So most of them it's for the Webpack dev server. Don't be afraid. The builds usually for production are really small. So it's a lot of boilerplate, but now everything will be simple and we have a better structure for our app. So we're going to start with the app itself. We're going to install preact, which is the framework we're showcasing, so makes sense. and um, we're just starting by importing it, right? So it uses the ECMAScript 2015 module dependency syntax. So we are going to need from preact, we're going to use h, which is hyperscript, which is the function that is going to run our UI code, and render. Render is the function that will it's gonna be to mount our application and render it. So what Babel does with the plugin is to get our JSX, which is our HTML-like UI syntax, and convert that to H calls, right? So using Babel, you can even don't use Babel, you can use hyperscript. For example, let's create an H1 with a text saying hola, which is hello in Spanish. That's the first parameter for render, and the second parameter it's the mounting node, right? So in our case, it's gonna be the root div, which is in our HTML. So the first one is the component we're creating with this hyperscript function, and the second one is the mounting div. So if we refresh, we have the hola, the hello. So that means that our app is working, which is really cool. So as you see, like you can use this syntax, but it's really ugly. So that's the whole point of using JSX. So let's do it with JSX. We'll create an H1 with hola inside. Let's see that the only thing that JSX does is to convert this nice, pretty HTML to the H. So as you see, it's the same, exactly the same code, right? It's H1, null, hola. So that's the whole point of JSX, to write in a prettier way. So as we said before, preact has this function render, which is in charge of rendering actually your app. You're going to pass a component, the main component in the first parameter, and the second parameter it's the mounting div. You can also do document.body, but it's not recommended. It can break things. So we're going to stick with the root div. So we're going to start with our app. The idea behind React and preact, it's to think our UI as different components that get some specific parameters and returns, given those parameters, a specific result that if you always pass the same parameters, it's gonna be the same result. This comes from functional programming, and it's a really nice feature called transparent referencing. So referential transparency. The other thing from functional programming is that the way you have to create complexity is by composing stuff. So the idea, if you want to create an app that has like a header and a body and whatever, you're gonna create a div with a header and a router with something else inside. So this is like you are adding things one inside the other, and that will create your whole app. But you're exactly doing that, composing like one thing with another to create the results you want. That's a really nice feature that will allow us to think really easier about our app. So the structure I used to use, you can follow or not, it's just convention. It's that I have two folders inside shares, more three in fact, but one is components, is our like, we can call it dumb components. They are the components that don't have state. The containers are those that contains other components and that will contain the state of the app. And in our app, and usually I try to map containers to routes. So every time you enter to a route, you have state from that route, and then the rest of the components will show the UI, but those one will be able to control the state of the app. So that's the structure that I use in general. Usually it's like a root will be exactly one component, and then we'll use and I will try to use as much stateless components, which is these components without state for in the our components folder. So the first thing I'm going to do is to create a stateless component. I'm going to import it. We didn't create it yet, but we're going to use it. It's called application, and I'm going to put it inside components slash app application.js because it's going to be stateless and it's going to be just containing other components. So as I said, like on webpack, I use the result property, so I don't need to do a relative require. I can do I can reference it from the root of our app, which is really nice. And I'm going to create this ser/components/slash application.js file. So we're going to draw, instead of that h1, the application, which is like kind of an HTML tag, but it's gonna transpile and to my h function using that app, right? That module. So how to create a component is really easy. So we're going to create to import the h function, which is gonna use our JSX, right? It's shipped with preact. So if we don't define this, after transpilation, the code won't know what to do with this h function if we don't import it. And we're going just to export a function, which is pretty cool. So a stateless component is just functions. You give it some parameters, and it returns every time you give it a parameter, it returns the same results. So let's start with an h1 hey Dan, hola Dan, which is hi Dan. So our components will be just functions, which is pretty handy. So this is the whole thing. Our app receives some parameters and returns just a result without side effects. That's called a stateless component. So I'm going to use arrow functions. This is from ECMAScript 2015. You should learn it if already not, but it's the same thing as the previous function. If there is only one statement, you can return it without using curly braces. And I add parentheses. To close the JSX, but you don't need to write the function, the keyword return, because if there's just one statement, it's going to return that one. So it's the same. Both functions are the same thing, like using export default, of course. So this is going to be our function. So it's really easy to think about our components because they are functions that receive some parameter and returns a specific stuff. We're going to use composition to make complexity from this. So this is not really interesting. So let's do something else. We're going to create a div to wrap our stuff. Let's create a header, and then it's gonna have a router, right? So what the router has, this is gonna use preact router, which is really similar to React router, and it's gonna do client-side routing. We're going to have two routes, the home and the about. They're gonna be also components, and there's gonna be different components, right? So we're going exactly to compose them to have a route. So let's install what we need, which is preact router, and we're going to import it, right? So that's all. And then, like preact router, it's just another component. So it's gonna choose with a route to follow based on the path parameter. So we call this a prop instead of parameter, a property, but it's gonna be one parameter in our component. So we have the home and the about. That's all. Now will be we need to create our components. Let's create a header. The same thing always import age from preact and then expose a function, right? So the idea is that the API surface is really small. That's another really nice selling point for this kind of frameworks. So it's just a div with an h1 saying emo, which is the name of the app. And let's do a navigation, for example. So let's use header to do a little more semantic. It's gonna have a navigation bar, as I said, and it's gonna have links. So preact router have these links components. It creates just anchors, but it's handier and works better in some situations. So it's kind of the same, but under some circumstances it's better. So let's use it. So if you are in the root, let's go to home, and if you are in about, let's go to /about. All right, so that's all. That's our header. It seems really easy. And let's create our containers, which will be our pages, right? We can call it our pages. So those are gonna be stateful components. So they are going to be represented as classes in JS. So let's start with about, which is easier. Import age from preact as always. This repetitive, but repetitive is good. Let's start with a function, so it can be just a function instead of a class for this thing. So we're going to create a paragraph. Okay, this is in Spanish because the original tutorial I made in Spanish, but it says this is the best app in the world. And let's create the home. So this one I'm going to write it as a stateful component because I need to handle state here. So let's import age from preact, and every time I want to create a stateful component, I need to call a component. So we're going to create a class that extends this preact component. That's the whole point. So component is a preact class. So export default, and instead of a function, it's going to be a class named home, and we'll extend the component class from preact, right? So it will have, for now, just a render function. It's the only one required function method of the class, and it's the same idea of before. We're going to just return JSX. So for now, it's going to be just a div. Sorry. And it's going to say home. Let's see if it works. It's another project. Let's close it. Okay. Something not working. Here is not defined. Okay. We need to call these components, right? We forget about that. Import header from the component. Sorry. So again, I'm using the resolve function from a property from webpack, so I can do component / header instead of serves components header. And then the home and about. They're from containers because they are pages and we are mapping pages with containers. Now it should work. Okay, cool. So we have the title, emo, from the header, and then 2 routes, home and about, and they have clients are routing. That's cool. We have an app with routing. Clients are routing, so it's our single page application. Let's add some styles to make it a little better. For that, we're going to start with the header, and we're going to do something called CSS in JS. So there are different ways to do it. A lot of people are doing CSS modules, so you can require CSS files and then use classes. I really like better to use CS in CSS. So you can do that if you use if you want to use CSS, plain CSS. So you do like class name equal your module. So the idea is that it exports a class name that then you can use it. But let's use JS and CSS. So the idea is that, at least for me, in every component, I create a styles object. So the nice thing about this is that you are going to deliver the less amount of CSS, of possible CSS, because the CSS is shipped on JS. You are just delivering the CSS for the JS components that are being shown. Yeah, it's not so good for sharing CSS, but you can use things for that. Also, if you want to use do prefixing and everything, you can use something called Radium, which is a really nice normal. So I call styles this object, and then I'm going to style everything. So for example, for header, my style is going to be styles.container, right? Which is a property of my object. And it's going to be, so let's do background blue, color white. And I'm going to use Flexbox. If you're not familiar with Flexbox yet, you should. It's amazing. It's really easy to do layouts nowadays with that. And justify content, what we'll do space between is to separate our content horizontally, and all items, we're going to center it, so we're going to center items vertically. So let's see what's up. I forget to put it inside container, it's slice.container. So let's put that inside container and see that now we have a really nice header, right? Let's add some padding. Cool. As you see, the default measure it's in pixels, so I can do just 10. And then let's add some styles for the links. For example, let's do display inline block. And let's add a margin of 10 pixels. So the only difference is now the properties needs to be camel case instead of with dashes, because it's in JavaScript it's easier and it's not breaking if you don't use quotes. I added some more styles. Then you have the routing. As you see, I just define an object with properties and assign the properties. Remember, not use dashes, just use camel case. And again, this is not prefixing or doing anything for us, pre-processing. If you want to do that, you can use, for example, Radium. Radium is pretty cool. So you are going to encase your components with Radium, and it's going to be to do all the prefixing and whatever stuff for you. So you like for still component, you do Radium and you wrap your components. If you use decorators, there is a decorator which is pretty handy. That's all. I'm not going to do it, but it's just that. So that's how I added styles to my component. Let's go to the home. So it's in containers. The home will have an input, so you can add your text that is going to be interpreted as and return you emojis. And for the other hand, we will have a list, right? So the whole thing is that I can say, okay, I have this component called list, and it's going to live in other part of my app, but it's a more declarative language. So I'm gonna create the list in my components folder. The list component is gonna be stateless. So even if my page is stateful, the list don't need to know about any state. It's just gonna render the items that I'm gonna pass, right? So let's create a property called items, and for now it's gonna be an empty array. So every time the list will go to every item and render a function. So our function, the first parameter for a component, it's the props, and the second one is the state. So in our case, we have our properties has just one property called items. We're going to create a list, an order list, and for each item, we're going to iterate and return something. In our case, a list item, and we're going to do something. It's like, okay, so my list is generic, so every time you call it, you can define how it's going to render. So you can pass a property called render item. So the caller of the component can define how it's gonna be rendered. So it's gonna call the function with the item parameter, and you can do whatever. So for example, in this case, we're going to do this dot render item, and we'll bind it to our own class. So let's create that method. It's gonna receive the item, and it's gonna return, let's say, an empty text. So if you go to the home, it's broken. Let's see what's happened. List is not defined. We forget to import it. So it's in components/list. The next thing is that we can use this list in other components, right? So it's nice to have it abstracted. So this is the input, and it has nothing in it. So let's add some styles, right? So again, we're going to create an object, a styles object. Let's add the input, and now like a 100% width, so it will be all the screen. The height will be 60 pixels and a padding of 20 pixels. Let's add the font size as 1.2 EMs. So I'm using EMs because I know the cool quiz does it. Let's use viewport width instead of percent. And we need to add the styles, right? We need to say that our styles will be in the styles object on the input property. It worked. Awesome. Really nice box. And what I did is exactly like this is JS in CSS. So let's add a placeholder. Search, for example. Okay. And now we need to do it to fill this empty array, right? So this is the whole idea of stateful components. It's we need to store the item somewhere and refresh it every time we have new data. So what we're going to do is to add a constructor for our class. It's going to receive the props, so the properties that are passed. So when I call to let's say application, if I pass to the home a property called a equal b, so then we'll receive the property a with the value b. So in fact we can try it. So if it's a equal b, let's console log the a property. So first we need to call super because we're extending component in classes. We need to call super to make the work. Let's see what's up. And we need to save, and then you see b, right? Because we passed the property a with the value b. So if you print the properties, we have all the routing properties, which is really handy. and then the properties. So if I say A equal an array with a 1, 2, 3 property, so we have it there. So we can pass whatever we want through props, not just strings, right? That's the way we have to pass properties in preact and react. So what we're going to do is to define the initial state. So in our case, the initial state will be an object. And it has items, right? For default, it's just an empty list. Why? Because I didn't receive any items yet. And then what we're going to do is like render will receive two properties. So in React and in Preact, you can do the same. You have this dot state and this dot props. So you can get from the state the items. Preact has this really handy feature, which is the render function receives the props and the state as parameters, as the same as stateless components. So it's really cool that we don't need to add more lines our code. So instead of passing the empty array, we're going to pass the items that we have from our state. So if you remember, the first parameter is the props, the second is the state has items, and we're going to render the items. This is going to render every time we change the state. So, okay. We have an empty list, it's useless, but fine. And the last thing we need to do for now, it's, well, how to go fetch data and make this work, right? So also, besides items, we have value. Value will be the value of the input. So I need to say, okay, so the value of the input is going to be our value from the state. Okay, so this is really important. And secondly, when you change, you need to execute a function to update our state. For example, this dot add input dot bind our own class, right? This is really important. And then we need to create the on input function that will receive. It's for now we're not going to do anything. So our default value, let's say that hey Dan. So we have a default. So because I set the default, the value is changing, right? But it's not gonna change even if I change the input. So it's always rendering value. So on input, we'll get our event and it's gonna update the state, right? So every time I draw, we're going to get the event. So our value will be event.target.value. And it's really important that we call set state. So if we says this dot state equals something, that's not gonna work because Preact needs to know that you are changing stuff. So calling set state, it's gonna not only replace the old state with the new one, but also call a different lifecycle methods. So in this case, we're going to change the value. So in EnigmaCrypt 2015, you can do value, and it's gonna say like, okay, the property value will have as its value the value of the variable. So it's like if you call value, it's gonna value two dots the value of the variable. So we can just console log and see what's happening, right? So let's say, okay, what's the value? And you can pass the value. So every time I'm gonna add input, it's gonna change the state. If I don't do that, we'll say that the console log is not gonna trigger, right? So that's really important. If I want, in preact, not react, I can use a really handy method called link state. So the idea is, because this pattern is really common, you can in preact, instead of do all that, you can say, okay, link state this with the state variable called value. So you don't need to do this function. But in this case, we're going to stick with that one because we want to do more stuff with this. So okay, we just already changed the state. And now we need to call the API, right? The API. So I used to have this library called data layer that I create inside services. For me, services is everything that is not UI. So if it's not UI, let's put it on services. In this case, that data layer will fit there. So for example, everything about APIs, authentication, whatever, I put it there. It's just my way to do it. So let's get fetch emojis, which will be a function inside the data layer. It's gonna use promises, so we're going to fetch emojis, and let's pass the text, right? Then after the fetch is complete, we're going to take the JSON, the item list, and we're going to set the state again with a new items list, right? Because it's gonna be like a property name, items, value, the content of the items, variable. So this is gonna be the thing that we're going to get from the API. And we need to create the function, right? So you should use the fetch polyfill, isomorphic fetch. I'm not going to use it because it's a demonstration, but if you install isomorphic fetch, it's a polyfill. But because it's working on my Chrome, I'm not using it. So you export the the function fetch emojis. It takes a text as a parameter. It does fetch, the fetch query. We are going to search the API calls, and let's replace the text with that template that text our text on the API call. And then when it's finished, I need to convert that to JSON. Cool. And then let's do this. So after we have the JSON, let's format it. So let's return just the results. Let's do results. So we can do pattern deconstructing. You don't need to do this, but I like it. So this is our API call. And supposedly we'll receive the items and set the state. Let's see if it works. Cool. So as you saw, it draws some items, so it makes sense that we got the responses. But it's empty because our render function, it's empty, right? So let's remove this log. And we are to do the render item function. So we're just going to return a div. In one hand we're going to have a span with the text. So in JSX you put the item. You use the variables inside curly braces. So item, it's called text. And we're going to have another span. Item. So this is the styles dot item text. And the second one will hold the scores, and it's called v styles dot item score. And it's gonna return the score, right? And the div will have the styles dot let's say item container. So let's add some styles. Item container will be a flex container. Let's give it some spacing, so that is that the content will be as separated as possible and align at the center. And I need to say that the styles will come from an object. I call container to the wrapper. You can call it wrapper or whatever. I call it container. So I'm gonna remove the list style. Oh, I always forget. It's not CSS. It's gonna have camel case, right? Let's see how it works. And we're going to remove the default search. Okay, cool. So we have the text and the scores. It's not that ugly, but it is. Let's style it a little more. I need to add to remove the margin from the list. Sorry, it's padding. I always confuse about this. Cool. Let's add some more styling to the list. Sorry, let's add some padding to the whole list. And a border at the bottom of each element. And now let's see. On the item, this is just styling. It's not part of the preact introduction, but we want nice styles. So let's add to item score, background color, like CCC is the only color I know, and a border radius, 999 to make it round, and a padding of 10. Let's see how it works. That sounds weird. We're missing something. Oh, this is for not for the list, but for the item. So let's remove it. And we can add it to the item. So you can do this on your render item function, but I'm going to use here, like, it's not as modular as it can be, but it works. Cool. And yeah, that's need to be margin. Oh, sorry, that's on the list. Cool. That's padding, sorry. Great, that's what I wanted. Well, let's add 15 instead of 10. And last thing, this is really ugly. Let's make it more user-friendly. Let's say for example, we can do it here. So let's create a function called get our prettify score. The function prettify score, it's gonna receive the score, of course. It's gonna return a string. So we're going to use a template string. So it's score to fix 2. So first we're going to multiply by 100 to get the percentage, and then add it to decimal. That's pretty nice. And that works. And let's add the percent sign. So that will be a variable in our template, and then the percent sign. Okay, that's really nice. So with arrow function, it's prettier. That's not bad. Hey, Dan. And the API is really good. So we have an app that has client routing. that it's composable. It has a nice structure. So it goes to the network, goes to the API.